Okay. Okay. All righty. Welcome to Planning Scribble Tables for Events by your teachers. I'm Lillias McGuffin.
I'm Isaac Bain.
Yeah, we're both scribes. More specifically, I have been the regional and the kingdom scribe, so I have told people how to do this. I've done it. I've run local guild stuff on my end. So this is something that we've done a lot.
And I've been a Bronial officer and co-head for the local Scrabble Guild for years at this point.
It's one of those jobs that never seems to swap hands. So anyway, so getting a table at your event. We kind of wrote this class to aim a little bit toward whether you are a scribe or not a scribe, because you might be an autocrat who just would really love to have a Scribble table hosted at your event. So we wanted to kind of cover that as well. So if you are running an event or you're the local who has been put in charge of having a table, whether you happen to actually know how to do that or not, somebody said, hey, or you volunteered, there are things you can do. The first thing would be if you have a local Scribble Guild head, to speak to them. If not, a regional scribe is your friend. You can also go ahead and speak to the kingdom scribe if need be, but usually as long as you have a regional and they're currently responsive, like you hope your regional officers are in any area, they are actually responsible for making sure that tables happen in their region at least once a quarter. So, if you contact them and say, hey, we would really like to have a table at our event, they'll go, yay, because they don't have to figure out who they can ask, hey, do you want to have a Scribble table at your event? If you're putting it together yourself, you can still ask these people and any scribes for assistance and help bringing supplies or anything that you personally don't own. Because of course lots of people would love to be willing to organize a table, but that does not mean you have to be the one person to bring all of the supplies. So don't feel like that's something that you must do in order to coordinate.
So some of the needs for having the Scrabble table at your event, you really should be coordinating with your event stewards. Make sure there's space, make sure that there's tables and chairs and room between any of the tables and chairs so you're not bumping into other people. Bumping a Scrabble table tends to get you dirty looks, if not outright threats. Let's see, space outside the flow of traffic. Some of the other things that's really nice to have when painting is good lighting and access to water. That doesn't have to be immediate because we can get like the paint water cups filled up at the start and then change them throughout the day. But having some sort of access to water is always a bonus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So supplies that you need for a table. We've kind of broken this down into things that are necessary and things that are really great to have, but not necessarily 100% must have. The things that you need to make sure you have, of course, are scrolls. So if you're a local guild leader or you have a local guild, you've probably got some around. If not, contact the regional. It is their job to make sure to get scrolls to and from people who need them. We have a note in here because we weren't sure if non-Ansteorans might be showing up today, that if your kingdom does all original work, the relevant thing here would be to have the appropriate paper cut in whatever sizes are appropriate to your kingdom. For paint, make sure you've got gouache. Also nowadays, I've seen them labeling it opaque watercolor, but it's still gouache. I think they just figured out that no one had any clue what that word was or what it meant. And so people were afraid to use the paint because they didn't know what that was. So sometimes it's been rebranded depending on where you see it, or it'll say both. Brushes, small sizes, any of the O's, you know, O, double O, triple O, quadruple O. We don't have 007 here, but you know. And smaller are good. Smaller sizes being denoted by any number in a fraction and then over 0. So like a 10-aught is smaller than a 0, and then a 20-aught is smaller than a 10-aught, and on down. Mostly the smallest you're ever gonna see is a 20. And not everybody needs a brush that small, so don't feel like you have to supply them, because what matters most is the quality of the tip of the brush more than exactly how tiny it is. Probably most people coming to a Scribble table are not going to need a super tiny brush. Cups for water, preferably several so that people aren't sharing water, because as it is, they'll be swapping water out often enough. And if they're using different colors, your water tincture is going to mess with your paint color in the container really quickly. Paper towels, for a couple of reasons. For keeping the hand oil off of scrolls, people should have their hands on a paper towel if it's on the page. Because sometimes you need to rest your hand to reach something. Paper towel keeps the skin oils from getting on the page and messing with your paints and your inks. Also good for wiping your brushes when you rinse them, and cleaning up your workspace. So I usually try to bring a whole roll of those. Even though I don't use a whole roll, I have plenty. Or if heaven forbid you have a water spill. You don't want to be running for something to wipe that up. Rulers, because you never know when someone's going to need to draw a straight line. And pencils for the same reason, for drawing in anything and for having them sign their name on the back of the scroll when they are done, which should be done in pencil, not in any kind of ink, because you don't want it to bleed through to the other side. It also helps, and you should definitely have descriptions or examples of how insignia on specific awards are supposed to be colored. Because certain awards, the insignia part that's on there has specific coloration determined by, you know, when it was registered with the College of Heralds. So it's supposed to be a black star on a gold background. You cannot paint the background purple. But having descriptions or actual examples of those insignia and instructions are a definite ought to, because while some of the charters do have those instructions or images on them, and they all ought to, they don't all have. Some of the newer ones don't have them on there yet in the instructions, and that's a little problematic.
Hey, Lillias, we have a question in the chat.
Yes.
Does every barony have a Scribble guild?
Not every barony has a Scribble guild. It's not required to have a guild for people locally to do scroll painting. I do know that a lot of groups have regular scroll painting. Like in the North, I know that all of the major baronies do have people who are actively painting and who have meetups, whether they consider themselves an official guild or not. And some of the smaller groups do as well. Was there another question?
I think STEPS does. I was just trying to see. I know our Minister of Arts and Sciences has been doing a lot of it, so I was just curious if it was a guild or if it was an officer that ran it.
Technically, they fall under the auspices. While obviously you're getting supplies from your regional, A&S officers can also absolutely make sure this happens because it's an art and a science, you know.
Okay.
So
thank you.
I know that a lot of the baronies have guilds. I know not everyone has a guild. It's a little harder to track because the guilds not being an official office, getting them to report is sometimes a little iffier because it's not a warranted office kind of situation. So sometimes a barony will have a lot of people who meet up. There is a list that is supposed to be current on the Kingdom Scribble website under the contacts of who, as far as the college is aware, was the most recent contact for Scribble Guild or Scribble related activity in each group in the kingdom. So it's a place to start. But yes, Other useful items to have, an X-Acto or craft knife, because if you're using the good thick paper, you can use that for things like scraping off mistakes off the top layer very carefully, which is totally period and very awesome. A color wheel is a useful thing to have because sometimes there are lots of people who just don't know how colors go together, or because it can help them visualize, here is my color scheme I'm thinking of, is this gonna work? If you are comfortable teaching people basic color theory, it can also be really useful to have as a visual example. But it gives people the option to, you know, look at different colors together and see what it might look like before they put it on paper. Or, you know, when you're discussing the difference between modern color and period color patterns and schemes. Because period color combinations are often very different from what we think of or are trained to use in like modern graphic design. So, small practice size projects. Having small projects, make and take style projects are great because you're gonna have children who want to come and scroll paint. And the last thing you ever wanna do is tell a child, no, we don't want you doing this, because if they start now, they're gonna be great at it when they get older because all they have to learn to do is paint in the lines, right?
Can I make a point on that as well?
Go for it.
Sometimes when I would do Scribble stuff for A&S, because we used to do Scribble and Late Beer at our house on Tuesdays when we first got here, I would make sure I had separate things of paint for the kids because they're not good about not mixing the colors and all of that. So, yeah.
And I actually have a specific palette that I let the kids use. It's still a decent quality palette, but it's my older one. It's the one that was used for 1,000,000 tables. And it's, you know, and it has a few colors in it that aren't perfectly period because it was a, you know, pre-boxed set, but it's not the cheapo, horrible kid paints with no pigment in them that, you know, made me think as a child I hated watercolor when it turned out what I hated was cheap supplies. It's frustrating for kids because they can still visualize cool things, but they want it to actually come out of the product. So yes, have an idea of which supplies you don't mind the kids using. The nice thing about a small practice project is if it's a make and take style item, kids can take it with them, which means they're not taking Kingdom property. And for newcomers, sometimes they're afraid to touch a Kingdom scroll the very first time they put brush to paint because they don't want to ruin something. Even though we know, because we know that it's going to happen. People are going to practice on scrolls at some point. Mistakes happen, it's fine. It gives them something short and simple to try it out and see if they like it. And get comfortable with it before trying something larger if they're really, really hesitant. I mean, plenty of people will walk up and be like, ooh, and paint a charter. And if they're not afraid, you know they're going to be fine. Because most people who are not afraid have some basic art experience, even if it's like middle school art class, you know. So, but it gives them an option. Not required, but useful is having printouts or digital access if you have internet at your site because you're at a collegium somewhere to examples of common charters. There are some on the website. And then the scroll texts, if you have people who are working on original work or, you know, new designs for the Kingdom, knowing what the appropriate word texts are. But at a standard Scribble table, you're much less likely to have people who need that information, which is why it's not listed as mandatory. Because really, very few people at your general Scribble table who are coming, if they need that information, they probably brought it with them. Because they're probably working on something for the Kingdom. And if they're doing that, they're not your average Scribble table attendee who needs supplies from you.
Can you still get old charters that they're no longer using for practice?
Absolutely. If they have them, I know that as we've gone on, there are fewer and fewer of those. But if you happen to have old ones, whether they've been retired or not, they're great for practice. And we do have uses even for charters that aren't in use anymore, because we tend to give those to the office that handles replacing scrolls that have gotten destroyed. Because chances are, if it's, you know, a 30-year-old scroll, it might be one of those older designs. And then it's useful to be like, well, we can at least replace it with, you know, the design if it got flooded out or burnt, or, you know, because it happens, unfortunately. But we actually have an office that replaces those. So that's where a lot of the retired ones, if they get painted, will still end up. Nothing gets thrown away.
What's the office that replaces scrolls?
That one is it Golden Scroll?
Golden
I think
Scroll,
it's
I believe.
Golden Scroll.
Are they able to do the ones out of kingdom, or no?
This is the in kingdom office. So they won't have old scrolls from out of kingdom. You would have to talk to the kingdom scribe of whatever kingdom it was made in, if
Okay.
it was lost for those.
Okay.
But I know a lot of kingdoms do have some mechanism in place for using, you know, those older if they had printed designs. I mean, if it was all original work, they'll just, you know, they could make you something new. But the colleges do keep on record the signatures of all the different crowns, so that if they replace something, they can make sure that it has the correct signature on it, which is nice. That's supplies.
So a successful charter painting table is going to require some planning. You need to advertise it and let all the experienced scribes in the area know that it's going to happen. Ask them if they have time to stop by and help teach. A lot of scribes enjoy sitting around and talking about the scribal art, so you can also tend to put them to work when they come by to do that. The other big thing is to have some treats. People sitting around painting all day tend to get a little hungry, and so offering snacks encourages them to stay a little bit longer. And you can actually talk some other people into trying out Scribble because they feel guilty about taking that cookie and eating it, and so they'll sit down and paint for you for a little bit. Let's see. There's also usually inexperienced scribes, as well as some casual scribes, as well as children. So be prepared for doing the short make and take projects. And also make sure you keep an eye on these inexperienced people and basically help teach them about some of the scribal arts. And basically you just sort of Q&A for them.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay. How's
Is that all you guys had?
The end of the general presentation.
Okay.
As far as that goes, if there aren't any questions or anything else you'd like us to go over.
You covered all my questions.
Awesome.
Hey.
I'm doing more autocrating and stuff, and getting involved in things and volunteering in that area. So I kind of wanted to know like the different components and things to think of. And this was one that said planning, and I was like, ooh, something else to plan. Yay. But thank you. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks, you guys. Awesome job. And I will get the video posted in just a little bit.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.